All right, everybody, it is about that time. WB here. Thank you, all of you, if you are joining the channel, if you happen to be joining the channel live, or maybe even watching this on a rerun. This is episode 5 in Talking Certs. That's right, certifications, where we take a deep dive into the objectives of the exams that you might be tackling. So I'm going to be doing that today. We're going to be talking about CompTIA Network Plus N10-009. Keep in mind, very loose-knit type format, so if you have any questions, by all means, put them in the chat there. We'll answer them. If you have, maybe you're watching this on a rerun, remember you can always leave a comment if you have any questions too. We're also streaming live on our Discord server right now, so if you are a part of the Discord community, check out the WB Discord server. You can join that, and there are resources up there for you as well. So, a little bit about myself. My name is Wes Bryan, again, WB here, and you can find me on LinkedIn, put a little bit of connection information up here. You can find me at Gmail, as well as out there on X, or the platform formerly known as Twitter. You can also reach out to the Discord server, like I was mentioning. We've got a few members in there, and the server's growing, as we speak, and I put a lot of the lessons that I create, different types of content up there for you, so that if you happen to be studying, you can benefit from some of the stuff that I kind of create in the background as I am creating, content in general, because that's kind of what I do, part-time in the background. So anyways, without that, without all of that being said, let's go ahead. The one thing I do ask you to do, here's a little bit of a shameless plug. If you like what you see here, subscribe to the channel, right? Click the notification bell, because we will be going live. And one of the ways that you can, know anytime a live stream comes out, join us in the chat room, or watching it on reruns. That will help too. The other thing too, I would ask you, if you, also if you like what you see, make sure that you leave a comment, right? Maybe share this as well if you've got somebody else that is tackling exams. Maybe it's the first time, and that can help them out, and it helps the channel out. It goes a long way. So without further ado, shameless plugs aside, what do you say? Let's go ahead. Let's talk a little bit about the CompTIA Network Plus N10-009 exam, right? So let's dive into the exam breakdown, right? The domains as we do. We've got 5 domains in this one, and varying weights equaling, a total of 100% of the overall exam. One of the first ones that you should be aware of, well, that's going to be network concepts. Network concepts is 23% of your overall exam. So you can see that this is one of the 2 domains that really have the bulk of the weight. We'll get to the domain 5.0, which is the one that has the most at 24%. But I do want you to keep in mind that this has a good bit of the weight on the exam. When we look at the next domain is 2.0, right? This is network implementation, and this ranks in at around 20% of the overall exam. We move into domain 3.0. This is the network operations section of the exam, or portion, I should say, and it sits at 19%. Then coming in really at the smallest weight of the overall exam is domain 4.0. Domain 4.0 is network security, and that ranks in at around 14% of the overall exam. Next up, and hey, Furious George, thank you for joining the live chat. This one is for you. Another thing I'd like to mention too in the live stream, as we build our Discord community, as we, you leave comments here, it really helps to steer the direction of the channel, right? So thank you for recommending this one out there, Furious George. As always, this one I know will help other people as well, but you were the one that recommended it, so thank you. All right, now the last one. When we look at the last objective, or excuse me, I'm sorry, domain, we look at 5.0. Well, 5.0 is the majority of the overall exam when you look at, not the majority of the overall exam, but it has the most weight, right? So when we're looking at the exam weights and what they're going to test the majority on, it's going to be domains 1.0, the basic networking concepts, and how you troubleshoot those concepts, right? So keep that in mind when you are studying for the certification, and it kind of helps you to dictate, where you can really expedite your studies. And in another episode, what I'm going to start doing, some talking cert live streams that I was thinking about doing, is when you're tackling practice exams, how you can really streamline your success and, again, expedite your training and where you should focus. Coming back to these domains compared to those practice exam scores really kind of helps to drive that. And there's other things too. That's an oversimplification of it, but it is one of those things that can help you, again, to increase your the efficiency of your studies, as well as reduce the amount of time that you have to determine which direction do I go in. All right, everybody, let's go ahead. The next thing up, we're going to dive in, like we do, to the skills required. Now, the skills required in this one is very interesting. And one of the things I want you to keep in mind is, as we go through, especially the CompTIA ones have a lot of these given us scenarios, right? Well, a given a scenario doesn't really tell me, if I say, hey, for instance, in the A+, that we talked about, you would see given a scenario anywhere from 16 to 18 times across each individual objective, so you're talking collectively, let's just say 32 times for Wes's bad math, between those two exams. So a lot of it was scenario driven, right? Well, here, when we look at our breakdown of Network Plus, it's kind of surprising. Now, don't let this catch you off guard, right? Because it's 9 times, right, that we see that given a scenario. But now let's start to talk about, like we do, what is it that I need to do? Given a scenario, do what, right? And then how many times does that actually show up on the exam? That's going to be important. And keep it in mind, too, by the way, just wanted to mention here that we are also live streaming in the Talking Cert voice channel on our Discord server. So if you ever want to join the live stream, something we're testing out here, I'm testing out to see if we can also benefit the people that are in our community Discord server likewise too. All right, so when we look at given a scenario, right, the first thing that we talk about is explaining, all right? Now, we'll also talk about what does that skill level really mean, right? So explaining, I want you to think about what does it take to explain something. Well, a lot of times that's going to be like a flashcard type scenario, right, where it is kind of like I joke around with people, right? It's like doing push-ups. It's not fun, but, sometimes you just have to do them, and I can't do push-ups to save my life. So explaining something, that's 10 times, right? So that is a lot of flashcard level material, I would tell you. But as we move on, you'll see. Compare and contrast, right? Compare and contrast comes up a lot too. And when we look at compare and contrast, you can see that a lot of times this is going to be in things like your network concepts, right? To give you an example, as you'll see as we go into the objectives themselves, the individual domains, there is one objective where it talks about compare and contrast common TCP and UDP ports, right? Transmission Control Protocol, User Datagram Protocol, those ports, right? And the port values. So that's really, if you think about it, that is something where, can I take a chart? Do I know what these protocols are used for? Can I identify in a scenario, again, remember, given that scenario, can I identify, what service is being used? FTP, right? What port is that connecting to? SSH, what port is that connecting to, right? We have to know, is it 20, 21, is it 22, right? So again, think about things like, that. It could be one sentence definitions that you can put, into your own wording that you can turn around and remember, and that's going to make you a little bit more successful on the exam. There's also summarization. Keep in mind, summarization comes up 3 times. When we look at summarization, it's all under that. Do you understand something, right? And again, being able to explain it back can help out tremendously. But then we're going to get into some areas here where we actually have to use, we have to start to use the technologies, right? And that comes up 3 times in our exam objectives. But then there's apply. There's also select and configure as well too, right? So you'll see that we have 3 different skills here that are requiring you to actually do something, right? So again, I want you to think about, when we talked about question types for the A+ exam, it's really applicable to all of the CompTIA exams, right? If you have to select and configure something, that means you could be looking at a performance-based question, right? A drag and drop, right? Some kind of diagram where, again, diagrammatically, right, you have maybe, I don't know, a network diagram, and they say, hey, you need to put these components in the right order to accomplish scenario X, Y, or Z. Again, you're going to actually have to be able to apply what you've been able to compare and contrast and summarize, right, or explain by example. Now, as we move down, another one I should have probably put in there in that same vein is implement, right, because that comes up twice as well. And then there's troubleshoot, right? We also have troubleshoot. Troubleshoot is going to come up 5 times, but don't let that fool you. Because when we talk about troubleshooting, that is, remember, 24% of the overall exam weight. All right, and then the last one is a standalone, and that's configure by itself, right? So you'll see I believe, thinking back, again, lots of objectives up here in this head. I believe when we looked at the A+, both of them, 1201 and 1202, you would see that there was, like, for instance, install and configure, and that was, let's say, 5 times it appeared in the exam objectives. But then there were also standalones, which it said install appeared 3 times and configure appeared 3 times, right? So being able to install an application from a platform-specific mobile app store, right, could just be downloading and clicking the install icon, right? That could be a series or a sequence of steps that you have to do when we talk about installation, versus you have to do that same thing, but then you have to do post-installation configurations, right? So you'll see that as well. Again, with the difference between the standalone and combined type skills that you have to do. So that kind of breaks down what we're seeing across the exam. And one of the things I also want you to know too is what level of skill does this mean, right? So, now that you know, hey, I know how many times they're asking me, CompTIA is asking me to do stuff, right? What level of skill does that require? And this, again, can help you to, prioritize how you study something, right? If you're one of those ones, which I am not, photographic memory, I do have a friend that has almost a photographic memory. Can't stand that, because that person can, read something literally once and just understand it and remember it. Maybe not remember each individual, parenthesis statement, but darn sure can remember that. So, if you're in a scenario like that where you have to understand something, right, the very first one, that's going to group together some of the ones where we've seen summarize and compare and contrast, right? So when we look, we have explain, and remember, explain is going to show up around 10 times. But then we got the compare and contrast, remember that's 5 times, and then summarize is 3 times. So keep in mind understanding level, right? At that understanding level, what you're talking about really is a lot of the definitions, being able to identify the technology, again, explaining it back, and really these 3 different skills required and skill level all lend themselves to things like flashcard materials, and sometimes even maybe not flashcard material, right? Just, hey, can I explain how something like SMTP is used, right? And what port is used, versus when we start to get into the next section, then we start talking about using, the software, and it's, the technologies. So when you think, it's a lot different, if I ask you a question that says, explain to me what SMTP, is used for, versus I need you to bring up an SMTP server, which they're not going to make you do, but the point is there's a big difference in how you need to tackle it, this type of skill and skill level with your studies. So when we get into use, you're going to see that use is broken down. Use by itself is actually used, so which is interesting. But then we have that under that category. We have apply, we have configure. We also it looks like I put apply twice. So there we go. Live on the live stream here, swing and a miss. So I'll definitely fix that for those of you that are going to hop on over to the Discord server and grab the information that is contained in the slide deck. So there we go. Configure, apply, and implement, right? And then when we look at use, the final one is that select and configure. Keep in mind the difference between the standalone type skill and these combined skills, right? So I have to, select a firewall. I have to, maybe configure a firewall rule within a terminal, right, within a terminal shell. So again, just as example on that one too. And then the last one is interesting because analyzation is where troubleshooting comes into play. So analyze, we have troubleshooting 5 times. All right. So that is a little bit about, how the skills break down. But now what I want to do is I want to turn our attention to a little bit more detail on the objectives themselves, because I want you to know, now that we've talked about, hey, what are the skills that we have to do, right? Use, install, summarize, compare and contrast. We've talked about the level of skill, right, that you might need for that as well too. We've talked about what else? The domain breakdowns across all 5 domains. But now let's go deep, right? Let's go ahead and deep dive, and let's start breaking down the individual domains and the objectives under each one of those domains. So when we look at the very first domain, like we mentioned, more towards the beginning of the live stream, we talked about domain 1.0 being network concepts. When we look at network concepts breaks down to a few different objectives. Those objectives, the very first one is going to be knowing a little bit about the OSI model. That's right. The ISO's OSI. God, I love, mirror opposite acronyms there, right? So the International Organization of Standardization developed the OSI model, right? The reference model. Domain 1, objective 1.1 is going to be something you're going to have to know about. So you're going to have to know the difference between layer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, right? The physical data link network. What else do we have? The transport session, presentation, and application. Got to get that one right, Wes. Boy, you are live on camera there. Next up is going to be 1.2. When we look at 1.2, this is compare and contrast network appliances, applications, and functions. This is where you're going to have to, again, think of the compare and contrast skill level here. When it comes to things like physical and virtualized appliances, do you know what a router is? A switch, right? Can you tell me what layer of the OSI model do they work on? If they're, sending information between devices, what is it that they're looking at in order to determine where the source and destination is, right? The difference between a router and a switch. And we'll have some of those videos coming up too on Network Plus to help you all out with that up on the YouTube channel, because I have gotten requests for Network Plus, so it is time to put that in the mix. And like I always say, the community drives really helps to drive the channel, so we'll be doing that in the future too. So that is 1.2, right? Really a high level of 1.2. There are other things too in there, like for instance, virtualized functions that you have to know and some concepts around that. Then you're going to have to put your head in the clouds, right? Not really, but 1.2, you have to summarize cloud and connectivity concepts, and there are different things that we have to know, right? What are the cloud connectivity options? What are deployment models for the cloud? What are the service models? So think of as a service, right? Pretty much we can tack on a lot of things as service today, but the three that are commonly agreed upon, and even more importantly defined by NIST, is the software as a service. Remember, the infrastructure and platform as a service. So you're going to have to know about that, including some of the characteristics of the cloud. So again, think about summarization here, right? And comparing it back to what we've learned when it comes to the skill level that you need on this. And again, let that drive your studies for this objective. Next up, we move into 1.4. 1.4, I might have kind of let the cat out of the bag, right? During the beginning of the live streams, because as one of the examples, I did talk about ports and protocols. But you can see here that you have to be able to identify it. And this is where identifying, protocols such as, secure shell running and operating over port 22, things like SFTP, right? Secure file transfer protocol. A little tricky on that one, because when we look at file transfer protocol, it operates on port 20 and port 21, right? So why does SFTP operate on port 22? Hint, hint. Hint, hint. Has something to do with a secure protocol that we also use that's in the list, and that is because we are sending those FTP commands through an encrypted SSH tunnel or session. So you have to be able to explain stuff like that, right? So think about that level of, studies for the exam. All right, Domain 1.0, it has really the majority, a good bulk of the objectives, even though troubleshooting Domain 5.0 has the majority of the weight. So next up, when we look at 1.5, we have to know a little bit about transmission media and receivers. For instance, do you know the difference between the 802.11 standards, right? Do you know what A, B, G, N, AC, AX, and AC, almost forgot AC, right? Do you know what those standards are? Do you know wired connections? Do you know IEEE 802.3 Ethernet-based standards? Fiber, copper-based communications, and what are the transceivers that we connect those to, right? Difference between things like SFPs, or the small form factor pluggables, and the quad SFPs as well. I always want to say SPF. I've done that as a student and as an instructor. It is not sunscreen. But you'll also have to know some network or connector types too, right? Think about fiber optic connectors like the SC, the subscriber connector, the Lucient, or what I call the little connector, because it's half the size of the subscriber connector, and it's more common in port, implementations where greater port density is needed, which is pretty much most networks today. So you're going to have to know a little bit about the transmission media and the transceivers too. Then we're going to have to know a little bit about how are the networks built, right? Specifically looking at topologies, architectures, and types, right? Do you know, can you compare and contrast the difference between a mesh network, right? A hybridized network, which could be a combination of a star network and maybe a point-to-point network, right? What's the difference, or what is a three-tiered hierarchical model, right? Where we have that core distribution and access layers, right? What's a collapse core, right? What's the difference between traffic flows, north to south, east to west? Those of you that like cybersecurity, I know sometimes the fundamentals can seem a little bit boring and a little bit lackluster, but when you talk about traffic flows at Network Plus, that's going to benefit you when you start talking about zero trust architecture, right? When they say, hey, we don't just protect north to south traffic, right? Now we, in zero trust, ZTA, we always verify, we always assume breach, right? We re-authenticate, but we are verifying that type of traffic that now moves east to west. Do you know what that is? What is a lateral movement, right? So those traffic flows, even though, like I said, seem kind of foundational here, will help you when you apply this to other areas of your studies and career. Then we move into 1.7. We look at 1.7. You're going to have to know about IP addressing, right? And this is where IPv4 comes in. And yes, we have to know the difference between the public IP addresses and, what is an RFC 1918 address, right? Do you know what an PIPA address is? And you're going to have to know about subnetting too, right? We have to know about VLSM, right? Varying the length of that subnet mask. CIDR notation, right? For routing traffic between across the internet, basically classless, right? And speaking of classes, you're going to have to know the IPv4 classes, right? A through E, knowing where those ranges begin, where those ranges end, and what are the usage, how many networks, and how many nodes on those networks, right? And that also includes the private IP address ranges for each class too. Then we move into the future, which really is now. They talk about, use cases for modern network environments. When we talk about evolving, right, what we're doing is we're really talking about, the ability today to programmatically control your networks through software, right? So that's where the software-defined SDN, or if you're doing this overlay type network across the WAN infrastructure, SD-WAN, and some of the components, that make up these software-defined technologies. Things like, for instance, VXLAN, right? How can we get past the limitation, which I believe is 12-bit, 4096, I believe, on traditional VLAN amounts, right? How many nodes could be in a VLAN, but we need to be able to scale that, a lot farther, and that's where things like VXLAN is, which I'm putting myself on the spot here. I will correct myself in an errata in the description. I believe that is a 24-bit field, which gives you 16,777,216 possibilities, right? Giving us the ability to scale across, put an overlay network over traditional layer 2 networks and scale them across data centers, right? Especially in certain scenarios where we need to really scale in a large fashion. Think of cloud-based solutions that are, doing geographic redundancy. ZTA is in this too. I kind of mentioned zero trust architecture. You're going to have to know about principal of least access. We'll have to know about SASE. SASE, I think that's how we say it, right? It's not somebody talking back to you, right? But secure access, secure edge. Then we'll have to know about IAC, infrastructure as a code, and there's a ton of stuff that we have to know when it comes to IAC. And source control, things like that, automation. And then you're going to have to know IPv6 addressing, and there's a few characteristics and attributes of that 128-bit address that you will have to know. Kind of a side note, just because, I also have, taught Network Plus over the years. I heard an analogy that said if you took the entire IPv4 address space and you converted each address into a grain of sand, you would comfortably fit all that sand in like a dump truck, right? But if you were to take that same analogy and apply it to the possibilities that you get in the IPv6 address space, 128-bit, that it would take a container that was like 1.3 billion times the size of the circumference of our Earth. You mathematicians out there, help me out on this one. I don't know that. Again, it's one of those things where when we talk about the address space of IPv6, it's so mind-bogglingly large. It just doesn't make sense, right? 3.4 undecillion, Oompa Loompa cillion. I think that's what it is, 3.4 undecillion. But let's go ahead. I digress. I like talking networking here. I am a tech geek. I am a IT nerd. And speaking of that, if you would like to hop on over to our Discord channel, check us out there as well too. There are other community members and a lot of resources being uploaded daily to help you out in your certification endeavors too. All right, let's go ahead and finally we have got into, well, the second domain, right? It looked like that one first domain was just going to keep going here. When we look at the second domain, this is network implementation, and believe it or not, this I believe it was 20% we've seen on that one. So this one only has 4 objectives in it. So again, but don't let that fool you. because these are complex topics here, even though it's 4 objectives. The very first one being explaining the characteristics of routing technologies, right? When we talk about static versus dynamic routing, right? What are some of those dynamic routing protocols? You know, the common ones that we use, OSPF, the Open Shortest Path First, right? Cisco's EIGRP, the Enhanced Interior Gateway Routing Protocol, and the one that we use to, the Path Vector Routing Protocol that we use to route across autonomous systems on the internet, BGP. Also things like route selection, some of the attributes that determine route selection you'll have to know, including things like address translation and a couple of other things in there as well too. Then we move from layer 3 of the OSI model, right? Routing technologies, hint, hint, exam alert. We move into layer 2 technologies, right? That data link layer of the OSI model. We have to know about the switching technologies. And we look at some of the switching technologies that you should be aware of, right? VLANs, virtual local area networks. Things like the interface configuration, right? What is a native VLAN? What's a voice VLAN? Do you know what the IEEE 802.1q specification is, right? The VLAN tagging specification. Do you know what link aggregation is too, right? So notice this is given a scenario configure, right? And I should have mentioned this when we seen some of those in the very first domain as well too. Given a scenario on this one means they very well could put you into one of those performance based questions, and you actually have to apply what it is that you know. So kind of a heads up on there. In fact, really, here, if you look, we have another one here, right? Given a scenario, select and configure wireless devices and technologies, right? So you're going to have to know about those 802.11 standards, right? And what are the, the frequencies of those 802.11 standards? Do you know the difference between the 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz standard? Do you know when the 6 gigahertz standard got opened up from the ISM or the Industrial, Scientific, and Medical band, right? So knowing those frequency options, right? Knowing, what are the encryption types, right? Why would we use WPA2 and WPA3 more as, greater support comes for it over something like WEP, right? The wired equivalent privacy, or even WPA itself, the earlier successor to WPA2. Do you know what antennas are, right? Omnidirectional and directional antennas, right? So all of this is going to come up, knowing attributes, again, as well, like the service set identifiers or SSIDs, and what, role do they play? Because if you look, again, given scenario here, this is going to require, it's obvious, I know, scenario-based, but more importantly, you're going to have to do a little bit of configuration on this one. So be aware and be prepared. The more you know, the better prepared you are going to be. And then finally, in the last objective in this one, 2.4 here, this is talking about some important factors of physical installations, right? Do you know, some of the common commercial building nomenclature jargon, right? Do you know what an MDF is and an IDF, right? When we talk about the intermediate distribution frame, do you know what a main distribution frame is? Do you know what a demarcation point is, right? Do you know what a 42U server rack is, right? Do you know what a U is on that, right? 1U, 2U, 3U, 4U, all the way up to 42U, right? Do you know what a patch panel is? And how about an FDP or fiber distribution panel? Other things that you'll have to know are uninterruptible power supplies, right? What is a power distribution unit on the inside of that power or on the inside of that server rack? And then also we have to know some environmental factors, as always. So those of you that are coming over from A+ and you have, passed your A+, got your A+ certification, congratulations, by the way. Bring some of that information that you had to know to pass that exam and the operational procedures, or is it 1202? 220-1202 exam. Bring some of that information over that you learned, right? I love when you can learn a technology. Study it once, remember it, and it benefits you across multiple exams, right? Make your studies a little bit easier on yourself, right? Humidity, right? We want somewhere between 50 and 60%. Too little humidity leads to static charge generation, potential electrostatic discharge, which does not bode well for our computer circuitry. Too much humidity, right? we start to get condensation, because of moisture, and that could lead to electrical damage, right? Fire suppressions, right? What class fire extinguisher should be used, right, to, suppress a fire in a data center, right? And there are a couple of options. That'll be something you'll have to keep an eye on when it comes to the channel, because, like I said, have gotten some requests for Net Plus content. All right, so let's go ahead and let's move in to network operations. That's right, Domain 3.0. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for joining us on our live stream, joining us in our Discord server, link in the description below if you want to join us in future live streams as well. If you like so far the deep dive that you've seen, I would ask you, doesn't take much, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, like, share, and comment. Comments are always welcome, and comments and questions in our Discord channel also, can help support you there and really guide the focus of the channel here. So, all right, let's move on. Shameless plug here. Network operations, Domain 3.0. So what are some of the things that we have to know in Domain 3.0? Well, one of the first things you have to know is a little bit about, organizational processes and procedures. Let's take a second here and let's lament a little bit of bureaucratic red tape, and I'm going to take a drink of my coffee here. All right, so I'm back from that. Yes, organizational processes do not sound fun, and procedures, but it is something that you have to know. And like a friend of mine says, good documentation it really is gold, right? So when we look at organizational procedures, it's going to be about documentation specifically around things like your diagrams. What's the difference between a physical and a logical diagram? What do rack diagrams look like, right? And when we're making those diagrams, what's the difference between a layer 1, layer 2, layer 3 diagram, right? Layer 3 being the routing topology and the logical aspect. Layer 2 being the physical link. The switching links, if you will. Now it's a little bit more about those physical connections, and then layer 1 being the electrical, mechanical characteristics of the network, right? So how does that actually apply to the diagrams, right? Asset inventory is going to be important here. Change and configuration management, not the same by proximity. And then things like your lifecycle management. Do you know what the EOL is, right? EOS, end of support. Do you know what software management through things like really patch management come into play? Patching and doing bug fixes, making sure firmware is up to date. So a little bit lackluster, I understand, but it is all very important information, very important skills to have in your network endeavors for sure. Next up, when we look at 3.2, now we're going to talk about monitoring our network technologies, right? This is where you're going to be introduced and have to know things like SNMP, the Simple Network Management Protocol, and knowing the difference between version 2 and version 3. Real briefly on that one, right? What's the level of encryption and security we can set on those, right? Do you know what a management information base is, or a MIB? What's a MIB walk? We also have to know about other things like log aggregation, API integration. That's just application programming interface, right? It's a connection point for software. How do we integrate that? And then solutions as well, too. For instance, network discovery, traffic analysis, performance monitoring, availability monitoring is important, too. Those of you that are a security mindset, right? Remember your security triad, right? The principles of security. That's confidentiality, availability, and then do I remember it? Confidentiality, integrity, and availability, right? Confidentiality, making sure only authorized users have access to your data. Integrity, making sure that that data is in the state that it's expected to be, free from errors or modification. And finally, availability, making sure that those users actually have access to that data, right? So availability monitoring is important too. And then also configuration monitoring, right? Configuration monitoring is important, and there are a lot of technologies today around the automation of configuration when it comes to combining that with configuration monitoring, so that you know that your systems are always in whatever the desired state might be. And then you'll have to know a little bit about things like SEMS, SEAMS, SEMS. I don't know. Leave a comment below. How do you pronounce it, right? The Security Information and Event Management Solutions, right? I say SEMS. I've heard people say either or. But I digress. Let's go ahead. Let's move on to our next concept under or objective under network operations. This is where we are going to turn our attention really to disaster recovery concepts, right? You're going to have to know what a recovery point objective is versus a recovery time objective, right? We talk about recovery point objective really is, the amount of data loss that's acceptable. Usually a measurement of time really is going to dictate how frequent your backups are done. Right, recovery time objective, right? What's the maximum amount of time a system can be offline, right? So, what is required to bring that, what's that time? What's that acceptable time frame? Things like MTTRs, right? We talk about MTTRs, mean time to repair. Yes, I understand. I've seen that. It could be mean time to repair, mean time to restore, mean time to recover. Oh my gosh, that's a pretty mean time. But this is mean time to repair. So, for instance, if a component within a system fails, how long is it going to be that we get that component restored, right, or repaired? Excuse me, right? And what is the mean time between failures, right? What is that expected time of consistent operation before we have a failure? Things like DR sites too. You're going to have to know what's the difference between a cold, warm, and hot site. Right, and measurements on that as well. When you're comparing and contrasting the attributes, right? Cold site, least configuration currently available at the site. Really, no configuration at all. No electrical power. No hardware. Versus the hot site, polar opposites of that is really a parallel and live operation site that you could fail over to almost instantaneously, right? But it costs a lot. So things like that is going to be important. Do keep in mind, notice the level of skills required for this one, right? This is going to be explain. So a lot about, flashcards, again, being able to put these into definitions that you understand and can remember for the exam when you get there. Next up, we have given a scenario, implement IPv4. And we look at, hey, let me take a second here and jump into the chat room there. Hyla Wilson, how frequently are these done? Well, these are going to be done more and more as the channel progresses. Right, this is something that I kind of started to help people out. As I am creating content, I have to be looking at these objectives to prepare content that I'm customizing. It's custom creation for some companies. So I will be doing a lot of these. We're going to be going through pretty much the entire CompTIA offering. Yes, we're going to be doing probably Security Plus next. Then we'll get into Cloud Plus and Server Plus, some of the other ones as well too. So thank you for joining. Keep in mind, like, subscribe, and you can also join our Discord server likewise. Keep the conversation going. All right, so back to it. We are at 3.4, right? When we look at Objective 3.4, this is where we have to actually implement IPv4 and IPv6. Implement. Keep in mind, right? So now we have to actually apply some of the information that we are learning. All right, dynamic addressing. Do you know what DHCP is, and do you know some of the components of a DHCP scope, right? What a scope is, what reservations are, lease time options, all kinds of things like that. And then DNS, very, very important. So you'll see the two major things in this. It should be, when we look at this objective, 3.4 should be, given a scenario, implement DNS and DHCP. So let's go ahead and just take the jargon out of that one real quick. Right, that is implement IPv4 and IPv6 is what it says, but it's actually implement DHCP and DNS. All right, moving on. Let's move on, walk on down the hall here. The next one is 3.5. We look at 3.5. 3.5 is going to be compare and contrast level. Think about this. The level of, studies that should go into this. Do you know the differences between such and such, right? So this is where you're going to have to know a little bit about network access and management tools, more specifically looking at things like VPNs. Do you know the difference between a site-to-site VPN, right? Connecting, essentially controlled by two routers, giving us almost a virtualized point-to-point connection across WANs, right, between two branch offices. What's a client-to-site VPN, right? Really allowing, also called a remote access VPN, right? We have a single client, typically using a piece of software that connects to a VPN gateway on our network, right? It allows a single user access. What's the difference between split tunnel and full tunnel, right? When it comes to virtual private networks, and then we have to know a little bit about some of the connection methods, likewise too. SSH, right? Graphical user interface, API, and console-based. All right, next up, let's go ahead, and we are switching really to the smallest, I would say the smallest of all of the domains here, weight-wise. Maybe I should say the lightest of the weight-wise, right? So, and that is security, and when we look at security, some of the things that I want you to be aware of, the very first one, right? This is going to be basic network security concepts, right? Do you know some of the logical security concepts, right? We talk about encryption, right? And I will tell you, it's not really called out here, but when we look at encryption, also know the, the basics of the CIA triad, right? Kind of already mentioned it. It's in common terminology here: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Right, but I want you to be able to, take encryption to that. How does encryption, right? How does encryption apply? What does it do when it comes to those pillars of security? Well, it allows our information to be confidential, right? That means only authorized users have access to the information, and encryption takes plain text, converts it to ciphertext, and unless you have the encryption and decryption keys, depending on if you're using symmetric or asymmetric encryption, you cannot read that information. Right? So explaining that type of importance, right? But then you're also going to have to look at physical security too. That's going to be important. And looking at audits and regulatory compliance, as well as things like network segmentation and enforcement. All right, let's go ahead and move into the next objective here inside of the network security domain. Remember, the smaller of the domains out of the 5 domains in the Network Plus N10-009 exam requirements. Next up is 4.2, summarize. Remember, level of skills like we talked about in the beginning of the live stream, summarizing various types of attacks and their impact to the networks. Right, do you know what a DDoS attack is versus a DOS attack? Do we know what a VLAN hopping attack is? What is MAC flooding, right, and what does that do? ARP, we talk about the address resolution protocol and knowing some of the basics around it. What is an ARP poisoning attack, right? What, can you summarize what that is back to me? Right, we talk about ARP poisoning, corrupting an ARP table with a malicious, or really just, if you think about it, unauthorized, an unauthorized entry in it that can redirect traffic, on the local area network to, an unauthorized source, or maybe redirect them to nothing. All right, giving you a denial of service attack, which now it sounds like I'm crossing the streams here. Total protonic reversal. Let me take a second here and look in chat. Yes. All right. Thank you. And Furious George, yes, I agree. Security is definitely fun. Don't let the size of this domain and its weight, I should say, on the exam deter you in any way. All right, let's go ahead. We're going to go into 4.3. When we look at 4.3, this is where we take what we've learned, and we're actually doing some application, right? Applying network security features to defense techniques and solutions, right? This is where you have to know about things like device hardening, right? How do we reduce the attack surface of an endpoint, right, or an end system? Network access control. Do you know what 802.1x is, right? Have to be careful with that one too, because 802.11x is just, x in that point is just a variable saying, hey, the entire wireless local area network 802.11 standards, right? But when we say a single one in that 802.1x, Do you know that that's port-based authentication? And what does that actually mean for us, right? Do you know what port security is, too, where we can tie a MAC address to a specific port and only allow that MAC address to communicate across it? MAC filtering, for instance, right? You know what ACLs are? And when we talk about security rules, do you know what URL filtering is, content filtering? So things like that are all going to be important when we look at the security domain. And that takes us, dun dun dun, to Domain 5.0. Yes, when we look at Domain 5.0, all the other domains, they were like, well, domains to me. But this domain is definitely the heaviest and weightiest of the overall exam weight. So I want you to be aware of that. And here's one that's interesting. You look at the very first one, right? When we look at the very first one, we talk about explaining the troubleshooting methodology. This is something that they actually removed from as a requirement, I should say, from the A+ exam. For the longest time, the A+ exam, actually really prior to, I want to say prior to the 1200 series, that troubleshooting methodology, the basics of it was required in the A+ and the Net+ exam. So I want you to keep in mind, while it's not required in A+, it is still implied. So here, you need to know CompTIA's troubleshooting methodology. And you also not only have to know the steps, you have to know the adjacencies, the ideas, right? Because this might be, even though it doesn't say given a scenario, right, they might actually put you in a scenario or tell you to identify, hey, you've just used open-ended questioning, right? You've of the user, right? You've looked at vendor documentation. You've looked at the troubleshooting ticket, right? You've gathered all this information. What is your next step, right? Or you've identified the symptoms, right? What is the next step that you have to do, right? So you'll see that there are a lot of different, actually 7 steps if I remember right. Let me count them here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's right. That's what I thought there were. There's 7 steps in the troubleshooting model. And if you're in any attribute of, let's say, the establish a theory of a probable cause, you need to know that the next step is test a theory to determine the cause. All right, so basically establishing a theory and then testing that theory. So that's what I mean when I say the adjacencies of the idea. The ideas there. All right, so next up we look at 5.2, and when we get into 5.2 now what we're talking about is troubleshooting common cabling and physical interface issues. All right, coffee check here real quick. And we're back. All right, so when we talk about common cabling issues, right, we're talking about incorrect cables for the different category standards that you have to know. By the way, remember when I told you that you have to know the cabling types, right, the difference between the fiber optic and copper connector, or cabling and their connectors? This is where that troubleshooting is going to come into play. So even though it's kind of an analyze type thing, I do want you to understand that it is scenario driven, but it could be a performance-based question too, where it could be a drag and drop. You also have to know, some of the attributes that really define signal degradation, right? Crosstalk, interference, attenuation, right? So being able to explain that, hey, a cable is 2.5 feet past its maximum transmission distance. We'll take some of the things that we've learned about cabling issues, right, if you haven't already. You have a CAT cable. That CAT cable is a, CAT 6 cable, and it is running, let's say, 101 meters, right, 360 feet. Why are we getting a progressive degradation of that signal as it leaves its source? That is attenuation, but it also comes back to the standards, right? The maximum transmission distance of all Ethernet cables is 100 meters. Now, the higher level speeds can reduce the overall transmission distance of a cable even further when it comes to, giving you the performance requirements of higher category cabling standards, right? So for instance, we can support a 10G network, 10G network over a Cat6A cable, Cat6 cable, I'll get it right eventually, a Cat6 cable, but I believe it's at 155 meters, where if you look at something like a Cat6A cable, you can get that at a full 100 meters, right? So I also, as I bump the microphone there, I do want you to remember that aspect as well. So signal degradation, also coming back to the fact that maybe you've got incorrect cable, maybe a category mismatch standards. Do you know, improper termination? What are some of the interface issues that you should be aware of too? And boy, let me tell you, it is hot in Florida. Time to pull out the electric cloth. There we go. The electric cloth is in the house. Sometimes it doesn't show up. All right, so we'll go ahead. Also, hardware issues is another thing that I want you to be aware of for that one too. Power over Ethernet and transceiver issues, all things that you should be aware of when it comes to the 5.2 objective. Next up, we have 5.3. When we look at 5.3, this is wireless. We're going to be troubleshooting, issues with network services. We will see, I jumped ahead of myself there. This is common issues with network services. This is where you're going to have to troubleshoot things like switching issues, for instance, STP, spanning tree protocol, and some things around that, right? What is the results of incorrect VLAN assignments, issues with the routing tables, your DHCP scopes, right? Address pool exhaustion, things like that, right? And that also goes back to being able to understand, even though they said IPv4 and IPv6 network services, told you it really should be DHCP and DNS, right? Well, you're going to have to know DNS. And when we say address pool exhaustion, that is something inside of that scope, right? That range of IP addresses that a DHCP server has to lease out. What happens when it's leased out all the addresses within that scope, right? That's where address pool exhaustion is. So remember, you're still sometimes having to tie a couple of objectives together really to understand these concepts and how to apply them to the exam, as well as misconfigurations around the TCP/IP properties of your network adapter, right? Incorrect default gateway, the IP address isn't right, you got the incorrect subnet mask, knowing the characteristics of IPv4 and why, if even a bit is off in a subnet mask, well, I guess it would depend on left or right. You can't communicate within a network, right? So those things come into play here. Then we go into 5.4, right? This is given a scenario, troubleshoot common performance issues. And this is where wireless does come into play when we talk about troubleshooting. So you're going to have to troubleshoot a variety of different things, like, for instance, congestion, bottlenecking, bandwidth issues, things that we have to worry about in, for instance, like voice over IP communications, right? Jitter. Right, that's when there's a variation in the sequential delivery of data between source and destination, and then we have to turn around and look at our wireless attributes, right, that can affect performance, right? Interference, signal degradation or loss, not having enough wireless coverage, client disassociation issues, right? Maybe a password changed and a client goes to connect to a wireless access point and can no longer connect. Things, and again, that's just an example. It could be, for instance, in your wireless adapters, there's something known as the RSSI, the relative signal strength indicator, and it will determine whether a wireless client stays associated with an access point as it gets farther and farther away from that access point. So if you've got your networks configured in an extended service set, and it starts to hop between the access points, right? These disassociation issues, is the client not hopping to another AP, and is it staying connected and has very, very poor signal, so things around that, roaming misconfigurations, all tied into that as well. All right, so next one is 5.5. When we look at 5.5, this is given a scenario, right? We're going to have to use the appropriate tools or protocols to solve networking issues. So when we talk about this, what are we talking about? Well, there are software tools, there are hardware tools, and they lump in together basic network device commands. So when we talk about software tools, protocol analyzers, then you have to drop down to the command line and know some command line utilities, commands, if you will. Ping, trace RT, trace route if you happen to be in Linux. Yes, I know it's a deprecated technology inside of Linux, but they still call it out. By the way, I would also know MTR, not expressly called out on the exam, but that's the my trace route. I think it used to be called Matt's trace route, but that's something that you can use for tracing the path a packet takes from source to destination. Other things like NS lookup. Do you know what TCP dump is, right? And being able to explain where would I use that versus something like a wireless analyzer or a protocol analyzer like Wireshark, right? So Nmap, what is Nmap? What is the LLDP, Link Layer Discovery Protocol, or the Cisco Discovery Protocol, CDP? When we look at some of the hardware-based tools, do you know what a toner probe is? Cable tester, taps, Wi-Fi analyzer, and a visual fault locator. Comes to some of the basic commands that you'll have to know. Things like show MAC dash address dash table, show route, show interface, show config, show ARP, right? So a few of the basic network device commands that you may or may not see. Think of things like, for instance, like a Cisco switch or a Cisco router, all right? All right, so that, with that, that makes up, looks like I've got another slide here. I don't know why I still got that slide in there, but let's go ahead and this is that troubleshooting I told you about. Live swing and a miss. All right, so now that we've got the old slide out there that didn't need to be there, let's go ahead and let's talk about the Network Plus exam. All right, when we look at the Network Plus exam, remember this is the N10-009 exam. That is the exam code for it. And yes, I do want you to be familiar with that, right? Because when you go to take your exam, when you go to request your voucher, make sure you are paying attention to the exam code, especially of those of you that maybe take a little bit to study. I know some people it takes longer than others. Some people can do this very short. I was the one that it took a very long time. So every time an exam has been released, it's around 3 years, it's going to come out with a new exam code. And that's why I tell you, just always pay attention to the exam code. That's going to be important. Now, when we look at the questions are going to be 90 questions max on this. And when we look at those questions, I do want you to keep in mind that you will have some surveys in there as well. Don't worry about any of those survey questions. They don't affect your score. And that also brings me to the length of how long do you have to take this test, right? This exam, and that's 90 minutes. Again, there are surveys at the beginning, surveys at the end. They don't affect your overall test time. The test time that you have is 90 minutes on this exam. Next up, when we look at the question types, like we've talked about in the past, the question types, multiple choice, and we have a single answer, right? Because you will see when you look up the documentation, it'll say a multiple answer or performance-based questions. I like you to know that, well, every answer really has multiple choice, right? What do you choose, right? But when we talk about multiple choice, they can either be a single answer makes it correct, or they could be multiple choice with multiple answer. On that, I want you to know that pay attention to the difference between a radio button and pay attention to the difference between a square box. Also pay attention to the how many they tell you to choose, right? Those conditionals, those conditions that really can change the context of the question. The good thing is typically if it is a multiple answer question, CompTIA is really good about telling you how many that you need to choose. Again, they're not trying to trick you. The answer's there. They just want you to, prove that you understand and can implement the technology. Now, speaking of implementing the technology, next up would be the performance-based questions, right? This is where it could be drag and drops. It could be where they give you some kind of terminal interface and you have to know how to use those commands. Can you identify those commands, right? Can you maybe drag and drop those commands into the appropriate location given some kind of diagram? All right, so the recommended experience for this one is going to be A+ certification. That's why I tell you, if you have passed some of that knowledge on the A+ certification, especially around the networking and the security concepts, bring that information on over here to the Network Plus exam. Let it really drive your studies. Obviously, the Network Plus, you're going to have to dive in fully into networking, but there are a lot of things that you have already needed to know for the A+ exam. So make it a little bit easier on yourself. Use those skills you've already learned to help optimize and expedite your training for this certification exam as well. But do keep in mind, if you don't have that, you might have to bring that to the table with additional studies. Give me a second here. The electric cloth, we're pulling it out here. Again, it is hot in Florida, and in my studios, it is even hotter than it is outside. Anyways, moving on. The last thing that I want you to know about this exam is that a passing score is up a little bit more than what we've seen in the A+ exams, right? So as a recap, remember we do have those live streams that are recorded, and we did one on both the 220-1201 exam and the 220-1202 exam. If you remember, the 220-1201 exam required 675, I'm putting myself on the spot, 675 for a passing score. The 1202 required 700, and this one now going up in its requirements is 720. And by the way, just a little tidbit there too. You'll see that when you move on to Security Plus, it goes up to 650. So you can see this kind of this curve here when it comes to your passing score requirements. Now, a couple of additional resources. I'll put these links in the description below, along with our Discord server. I want you to always remember you can join our Discord server, because we also will stream these live too, and if there's people that are a part of the community, they can communicate there likewise. But some of the additional resources that I want you to be aware of, again, it looks like I have not checked my slides. That is not the A+, that is not the A+ Core 2. The link there is for the CompTIA Network Plus certification. I will correct all typos in our live stream notes over on the Discord server, but that is the link to the Network Plus exam. Again, I will update that to say Network Plus N10-009. If you want to schedule your exam, you have a couple of options too, and that is Pearson VUE as well as OnView. Pearson VUE is the brick and mortar where you find the location and you schedule your test and you show up on the physical in the physical location. The OnView is if you cannot show up, or maybe there's not maybe there isn't a testing center in your location. It's an online platform. It does have some rules and restrictions and tests you need to go through to make sure that you can take the exam in a remote setting. But those are some of the resources. Like I said, if you are going to hop over to the Discord server, we will fix that typo up there at the top there. But that is the beauty of a live stream. Again, as always. And I do want to say, from, everybody out there, thank you so much really for taking the time to join us. I really enjoy doing these things for the community. It really, I like giving back. And if you like these type of live streams where we take about an hour or so, we go over the objectives that you need to be aware of, the level of understanding that you really should take to your studies. I will be continuing these. I've already got a request to do Server Plus, so you can see that's probably coming up soon too, because like I said, community drives the channel. I will be doing one on Security Plus, and you can see again in the future something will be coming up, another live stream for other CompTIA certifications as well. We're going to go ahead, we're going to get off of this stream, we're going to close this stream, and like I say, as always, thank you so much for taking the time. If you like what you have seen inside of our live streams here and the content, like, share, comment, subscribe, and until then, we'll see you next time.